Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCullum, and I'm here today at Morphy's with a very cool piece of Irish military history. This is a Howth Mauser. It is a Mauser model of 1871 rifle that is one of 900 rifles smuggled in broad daylight into Dublin in 1914 for the Irish Volunteers. Now, the history of the Irish independence movement, or movements, is a very complex one. It's a long story with lots of details. I'm going to do my best to cover this element of it for you today, but some of the elements are just fantastic. So this was a project run by the Irish Volunteers. They were a group supporting Irish independence, the southern three counties of Ireland, and in 1914 they became aware, of course, of the Ulster volunteer force smuggling guns into Northern Ireland. I actually have a previous video on one of the Commission Gewehr 88s that was brought into Northern Ireland by the Ulsters. I'll link to that in the description text below. But the Republicans, they find out about that, and there's the Curragh incident, or Curragh mutiny, where there was the British military essentially refused to act against the Ulsters, and so the Republicans in the South start to get concerned, like, if those guys are getting guns and they clearly have tacit government support, well, maybe we need to get some guns too. There's a quote from one of the guys involved who says something to the effect of, the only thing more ridiculous than an Ulsterman with a rifle is an Irish Republican who doesn't have a rifle. So they set about trying to find some guns, and by supreme irony, they end up locating a batch of Mauser Model 1871s from the exact same dealer who had sold the guns to the Ulster Volunteer Force just like a year earlier. It's a German dealer in Hamburg. And so they arranged to purchase these guns. It's 1,500 rifles and 39 or 40,000 rounds of ammunition, which sounds like a lot, but that's only actually something on the order of 20 or 25 rounds per rifle. At any rate, they arrange for this purchase. They need to figure out, okay, how are we going to smuggle these guns into Ireland? The British know that stuff's going on. It's at this point that we have two fantastically interesting people come into the story, and I hope you'll excuse me. I'm going to go on a little bit of a side tangent about these two, because holy crap, this is like Florence Nightingale marries Tom Clancy and they get into the international espionage business. The two people here are Erskine and Molly Childers. Erskine Childers is British. He's born in London in 1870, has the typical British, resolute belief in the superiority of the British race, joins the British Army, fights in the Boer War, comes back a bit disillusioned with British imperialism. At the same time, he was raised much of his childhood in Ireland by extended family. His parents died of tuberculosis when he was young. And he ends up a fervent supporter of Irish home rule, of Irish nationalism. He is also a fantastically popular international best-selling author. In 1903, he writes a book called The Riddle of the Sands about German espionage skullduggery in the Frisian Islands and a plan to invade the UK. Book is extremely popular. It's still considered today one of the best espionage, geopolitical espionage thrillers of all time. In 1903, shortly after writing the book, he meets Molly Osgood. She is the daughter of a prominent Boston family. She also has an interesting background. When she was 3 years old, she fell while ice skating and apparently grievously broke her pelvis, was immobile for the next 9 years, eventually regained the ability to walk, but only with 2 crutches. That didn't, however, stop her from taking up horseback riding and becoming an avid sailor. She falls in love with Erskine Childers. The two have a romance for like 2 months and then get married. Very happy marriage, apparently. They move back to the UK. Childers becomes active in politics. Molly also becomes fairly active after the events of this. When World War I breaks out, there's sort of a truce declared by most people on the Irish national question. Childers will do a whole bunch of really important work for the British military. Molly goes to work for Belgian refugee relief support. She's She is ultimately awarded the Order of the British Empire by King George. She gets the Queen's Medal from the Belgians. Like, they both have these very active, very cool, impressive careers. But to go back a bit, when the Irish volunteers are trying to figure out how to import these guns or smuggle these guns in from Hamburg, the Childers volunteer to use their yacht, which Molly's father had essentially given them as a wedding present. They have this little 50-foot sailing yacht called the Asgard. And they're like, well, we'll just sail over there and we'll pick the guns up and smuggle them back ourselves, because why not? So they do this. Erskine, having some background in espionage and understanding of espionage, actually floats some rumors about how there was going to be a shipment of guns smuggled into Ireland, but it was going to be on a trawler, an Irish fishing trawler. So he actually gets the British looking, like, on the alert for fishing trawlers. They come up with a cover story for the arms dealer in Hamburg that these are guns that are going to Mexico. And they successfully smuggle, like, an entire boatload of Mausers into Ireland. These things apparently take up basically all of the room in the cabin. It's a really uncomfortable voyage back from Hamburg to Dublin. And the Erskines take 900 of the 1,500 guns. The other 600 are on a separate ship. They go to a place called Kilcool. It's a separate, they deposit them separately. The real meat of the story is when the Asgard sails into Howth Harbor in Dublin. The Irish volunteers had decided very specifically that they wanted these guns to show up in the most brazen and public daylight fashion possible. The Ulster volunteers had tried to smuggle their guns in covertly, be all sneaky about it. The Republicans are like, no, we want specifically to try and poke the British into an over-aggressive response because the PR value will be really good. So they sail the Asgard into Dublin in the middle of the day. There's like 1,000 people turned out to get these guns, which they do. They're offloading guns from this boat in the harbor in broad daylight. The police show up. The police are ordered, basically, the head of the Dublin police is like, look, 1,000 people arming themselves in Dublin harbor is clearly not an acceptable activity. He sends in the police. The police are essentially unable to do anything about it. A lot of the policemen have some sympathy for the Irish volunteers. A lot of the policemen also look at this as like, oh, here's 1,000 people armed with oaken clubs specifically waiting for us, and oh, they're also getting guns. There are not that many of us. Do we really want to make this, are we going to die on this hill? Ultimately, they confiscate 19 rifles of the 900, and those are ultimately returned to the Irish volunteers after some legal action in the following weeks. While there's this big confrontation between the police and the crowd, the guys running the show recognize, like, okay, we don't want to push this. We like the police response, but we do want to actually keep these guns. So they start basically smuggling the guns out the back of the crowd while people in the front keep everyone occupied. They're dispersed, and ultimately, these guns become one of the most recognizable arms of the Easter Rising 2 years later in 1916. So, with all of that addressed, let's take a closer look at what they actually brought in the way of these Howth Mausers. The Mauser, model of 1871, has a number of distinctions. First off, it is the first real product created, marketed by the Mauser brothers that was a commercial success. And this is the beginning of the Mauser company and the whole Mauser legacy. This was also the first metallic cartridge rifle fielded by the state of Germany. It was introduced basically when the state of Germany was founded in 1871. It's a single-shot rifle. It's very simple. It's chambered for 11mm Mauser. That's 11.15 by 60 millimeters. It's a black powder cartridge. You can just drop a round on, close the bolt, fire it, extract and eject. It's a really simple gun to operate. And by 1914, this is a rifle that was pretty easily available on the international surplus market. So it was adopted by Germany in 1871, but it was then, by the time we get to 1914, it had been replaced by 3 subsequent patterns of newer service rifles. So In 1884, the Germans adopt a magazine-fed iteration of this that has a tube magazine under the barrel. Then in 1888, they adopt their first smokeless powder rifle, which is the Commissiongewehr model of 88. And then in 1898, they adopt another Mauser, the Mauser model of 98, that will serve them all the way through the end of World War II. So Mauser 71s are completely and thoroughly obsolete, but they're still functional guns. They would be cheap on the international market and available, and that made them kind of a perfect solution for the Irish volunteers. I'm sure they would have preferred some more modern guns like the Ulsters had imported, but they'll take what they can get. Now, alongside their Mauser 71s, the Irish volunteers got bayonets for them. And this is where I want to remind you guys that if you are running an international arms smuggling operation, you should probably know some details about guns, because what they apparently actually bought were French Gras bayonets, and the French Gras bayonet does not fit the Mauser 1871. And so what the Irish volunteers had to do was set up some workshops and kind of ad hoc modify these guns to try and fit the bayonets that they actually had. They couldn't really easily go back and return the bayonets, so instead it's modification time. So originally the bayonet lug was here on the side. They ground those off, and this is very much crude, one at a time hand workshop sort of stuff. They then ground off the bottom, added a bayonet lug here. They had to cut back the stock a little bit, and even that doesn't really do the job because the bayonet still doesn't actually fit on. They also had to grind down the top of the bayonets. This is a standard Gras bayonet. Unfortunately, I don't have a bayonet that specifically fits this rifle. It may well be that these guns only would fit the one specific bayonet that they were converted to use. But what they would do, this is similar to converting Gras bayonets to fit Commissiongewehr 88s, but you grind down the top here, and then they also actually had to slightly bend the blade of the bayonet, because even once you get this to fit, it kind of sits at an upward angle and the bullet would hit the bayonet blade. This bayonet conversion was a total mess. They did it. They didn't do it to all of the guns. They only did it to some. There is some written testimony from guys in charge of some units in the Irish uprising who basically said that they didn't trust any of their soldiers really to stand a real bayonet charge, because, you know, these are mostly civilian volunteers. They're not hardened soldiers, and bayonet fighting is a emotionally taxing sort of thing. So this is really interesting. This is the one distinctive feature on these rifles that were smuggled into the port of Howth. They didn't do any markings, any specific Irish markings to them. So what we see here are just the original German markings. This particular rifle was made by Mauser at Oberndorf. We have a serial number here. This is 74D. We have a whole pile of German proofs, although they're pretty well worn away there. You've got remnants of German proofs here on the stock. This rifle's had a long life. If you find yourself with a rifle that allegedly went through, you know, some guerrilla military operations 100 years ago and it looks pristine, chances are, yeah, that story may not be super accurate. This is kind of what you would expect for a rifle that did get smuggled across the English Channel and then hidden away in Ireland for a couple years before being used in the Easter Uprising. Revolutions, unfortunately, have a tendency to eat their own, and that's exactly what happened to Erskine Childers. In 1922, he was executed by the Irish Free State for the crime of, ironically, like irony of all ironies, firearms possession, specifically because of a little pocket pistol that he was gifted years earlier by, of all people, Michael Collins himself. So Erskine did not survive. That's often happens in revolutions. His wife, Molly, she lived until 1964. She passed away at the age of 89. After Erskine was killed, she continued to be quite active in a lot of charity organizations, had a lot of health problems relating to that childhood broken pelvis. But interestingly, their son, also named Erskine, I believe it's Erskine Hamilton, Childers would go on to be the 4th president of Ireland, taking office in the 1970s. So anyway, back to our rifles here. These rifles were not the only guns that the Irish volunteers had. They weren't the only guns that were used in the Easter Uprising. There was a wide variety of other stuff used there. They had a small number of British SMLEs. They had a decent number of British Longlees from guns that had been smuggled in from Canada, brought back from the Boer Wars. They had a variety of commercial guns that they picked up here and there. They had some Vetterli Vitalis. They had Martinis, probably mostly Martini Enfields in 303, but quite possibly also some of the older Martini Henrys in 577, 450. It was a huge mishmash of guns. Now, there's a really interesting provenance trail on these Howth Mausers specifically, because ultimately they end up in the possession of the formal Irish military when Ireland becomes its own state. And in 1959, Sam Cummings of Interarms, our favorite historical international arms dealer, purchases a whole bunch of guns from the Irish, including a couple hundred Mauser 1871s that are almost certainly guns that were originally in this batch of 1,500 imported or smuggled in 1914. Now, the provenance trail on a lot of these guns can get pretty murky, because even though we know they went to Sam Cummings, the Mauser 1871 is not a particularly rare rifle historically. Interarms, Sam Cummings' company, had a lot of Mauser 1871s from a lot of places, and there are no unique markings on these guns. The Irish didn't do anything specifically with them, except for the ones that they modified to fit their oops, we got the wrong bayonets. So there are some of these guns, like this one, that are really pretty solidly provenanced to the Howth smuggling. But there are a lot of other Mauser 1871s out there that you will see associated with Howth that are standard unmodified guns. And while some of those probably are legitimate, there's also really no way to prove it. And over the 100 years that have passed, stories can get very mussy. So yeah, it's unfortunate. There are a lot of legitimate provenance rifles that were legitimately there that just aren't, either today don't have any reliable provenance, or in the future will lose reliable provenance, and we'll lose track of which guns were there. But there are some like this that definitely were and are going to be pretty much always recognizable as such. So it was very cool to get a chance to take a look at this, to dig into some of the fascinating backstory of especially the Childers' really amazing story. Anyway, a big thanks to Morphes for giving me access to this one to film for you guys. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.